Here we go. We are in the second chapter of Esther, and we'll start this week at verse 12. That's where we left off. We've done a little bit of kind of back and forth. Sometimes with the story of Esther, it's helpful to look ahead a little bit to know what's going on. But we left off at verse 12, kind of in the middle of the story now, as Esther is being elevated to this position as the new queen. So Esther Chapter 2, verse 12 says this, the turn came for each girl to go in to King Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their cosmetic treatment, 6 months with oil of myrrh and 6 months with perfumes and cosmetics for women. When the girl went in to the king, she was given whatever she asked for to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening she went in, then in the morning she came back to the second harem in custody of Shashgaz, the king's eunuch, who was in charge of the concubines. She did not go into the king again unless the king delighted in her, and she was summoned by name. All right, now all of this is so interesting, and we talked about this last week. I mean, how unusual this is, and just how I think this strikes us as odd, that these women, these virgins who have been brought in from all over from the kingdom, that they spend these 12 months preparing for their night with the king. You know, the king is looking for a new queen. And so all of these virgins now have been put under the care of the king's officials, and we've noticed under the care of the eunuchs, because they will be safe there, at least from sexual assault, but they will be safely kept there. But that this 12 months of preparation, and it says in verse 12, under the regulations for the women, and it mentions cosmetic treatments, oil of myrrh, perfumes, cosmetics. It just stands out, I think, as unusual to us that a woman here, now a young woman, would need this much time to be prepared. And on the one hand, I think there's several, and this has, I think, perplexed people for many years now. I think people always find this is so unusual. Why do these young women need all this time of preparation? And I think there's several things that we can observe about that. One thing is just that this is how it is in the palace of King Ahasuerus. Everything is done in excess. That goes back to the beginning of the book of Esther, where the king is having this feast that goes on for 6 months, for his royal officials, followed by another feast of 7 days for everybody in the kingdom, and just all of the excess in terms of the menu. Everything is done in excess. So no less when a new queen is being sought, that the king would expect that these women have all of this time to prepare. So on one hand, it's a little window into the excess of the lavishness of the king's court. Again, this is a king at the height of his royal power, royal wealth, and so everything is done to the nth degree. But I think, also we can see too, I think we can also relate in our own time. Some people here pointed out last week, that indeed this is there is a timelessness about this. That this obsession with beauty and how we all look, whether it is by our dieting or, our cosmetics, we obsess about our clothing. This kind of skin deep, treatment, whether it's for Esther and the other virgins or ourselves in our own day. We all spend, maybe we don't spend a whole year just before we're married just for cosmetic treatments. But across the span of our lives, we all spend a lot of time in front of the mirror, or shopping for the right clothes. Or even, I guess you could even say, every bride, does, spend quite a bit of time preparing, finding the right hairdresser, the right person to put on the makeup, find the right dress. And it is interesting, actually. I think over recent years, We've even seen that brides and grooms, I think, are lengthening the times of their engagement because of all of those preparations. That they have to find the DJ and the right reception hall and all of that. I think I've noticed as a pastor, that couples will get engaged. And you hope, you're looking forward to this, you're excited, so the wedding's going to be this summer, right? Oh, no, we're going to get married it's going to be another year before we get married. We have to, there's so much we have to plan and prepare for. So I think that's another way for us to understand this, is that, when it's a big occasion like a wedding, we all do put a lot of time into the planning, and we worry about just getting it right. So there's a little bit of that going on here with Esther and the women in the harem. But another thing that I think that we should notice about this, and this you can see this in verse 12, that all of this is done under the regulations for the women, it says, or according to the manner of the women. That this is all being done according to these customs and laws and rules of the Persian court. And this has also been a theme now in the story of Esther. There are strange customs here, and everything has to be done according to the rules, according to the king's expectations. You kind of get a sense, even with this banquet at the beginning of the book of Esther. All these officials, they better be there, and even where was it? It was back in chapter 1, verse 7. All of this is being done. Verse 8, actually, chapter 1, verse 8. The king gave orders, to all the officials of his palace to do as each one desired. Everywhere you look, there's laws, expectations, and then when the queen does not show up, there's a new law that you have. This queen will now be banished from the king's presence, and now we're going to find a new queen. I think everywhere you turn in the Persian court, there are laws and regulations that have to be followed. And I think that's always something for us to notice in Scripture, is that I think for us as Christians, that should kind of help us to see or be prepared for sort of an invasion of God's grace. Because God's grace comes apart from the law. That's how the Apostle Paul puts it. That now, apart from the law, God's grace has been revealed to us in Jesus. Is that often in Scripture what will happen is you'll have people living like this under a heavy burden of the law. My goodness, 12 months of cosmetic treatments. This is just heavy regulations here. And God's grace is about to peek in and say, your life is under this heavy burden of the law. Well, now God's going to do something new apart from the law to bring freedom and redemption to his people. And in fact, you can even see that happening now. That's even starting to break in to this story of Esther. That in this kingdom where everything is happening according to custom, happening by the king and his royal decrees, there is something happening now apart from the law, because a Jewish girl is about to be married to a Gentile king. And that is certainly that's different from the Jewish custom, the Jewish law. And in fact, I'd like to just look back now, turn now. You can keep your hand here in Esther chapter 2, but let's go back to those books that precede Esther. Those books right before Esther, Ezra and Nehemiah. Because remember, all of these things are happening at the same time. That Ezra and Nehemiah tell about the Jews who return from Persia to Jerusalem. But Esther is this girl and her cousin Mordecai who stay behind in Persia. But go to Ezra chapter 10. Ezra chapter 10. Again, these books are very close to each other, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, all told at the same time and all grouped together in the Bible, so easy to find them here. So Ezra chapter 10 at verse 6, listen to this. It says, Then Ezra withdrew from before the house of God and went to the chamber of Jehon, son of Elishib, where he spent the night. He did not eat bread or drink water, for he was mourning over the faithlessness of the exiles. They made a proclamation throughout Judah and Jerusalem to all the returned exiles that they should assemble at Jerusalem, and that if any did not come within 3 days, by order of the officials and the elders, all their property should be forfeited, and they themselves banned from the congregation of the exiles. Then all the people of Judah and Benjamin assembled at Jerusalem within the 3 days. It was the 9th month, on the 20th day of the month. All the people sat in the open square before the house of God, trembling because of this matter and because of the heavy rain. Then Ezra the priest stood up and said to them, "You have trespassed and married foreign women, and so increased the guilt of Israel. Now make confession to the Lord, the God of your ancestors, and do his will. Separate yourselves from the people of the land and from the foreign wives." Then all the assembly answered with a loud voice, "It is so. We must do as you have said. But the people are many, and it is a time of heavy rain. We cannot stand in the open, nor is this a task for 1 day or for 2, for many of us have transgressed in this matter. Let our officials represent the whole assembly, and let all in our towns who have taken foreign wives come at appointed times, and with them the elders and judges of every town, until the fierce wrath of our God on this account is averted from us." Only Jonathan, son of Asahel, and Jaziah, son of Tikvah, opposed this, and Meshullam and Shabbathai, the Levites, supported them. Then the returned exiles did so. Okay? So you can keep reading and see all of these Israelites now who have married foreign women coming and separating from their wives because Ezra was concerned that this was against God's law and concerned that these foreign wives would lead the Israelites into idolatry. And that fear is not unfounded. I mean, you do get these stories in the scriptures. I mean, think of Solomon. I mean, this was one of the problems that King Solomon had. Very great king, David's son. Solomon, the great wise king of Israel, who wrote, the book of Proverbs, the Song of Solomon, and so on. But it was foreign wives who led Solomon into idolatry that brought a lot of trouble on the nation of Israel. And so now when these exiles come home, Ezra is beside himself because God has given them this fresh start, a chance to start over back in Jerusalem. But Ezra sees them marrying these foreign wives and says, "You guys, come on. God has given us this new chance to start over in Jerusalem, and you're going to ruin it by marrying these foreign wives." Something similar actually happens in the next book, too. You can look at Nehemiah, and especially Nehemiah 13. This is the end of Nehemiah. You could look at the end of that book, Nehemiah chapter 13, starting at verse 23. It's a similar kind of episode. It says, "In those days also I saw Jews who had married women of Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab, and half of their children spoke the language of Ashdod, and they could not speak the language of Judah, but spoke the language of various peoples. And I contended with them, and cursed them, and beat some of them, and pulled out their hair. And I made them take an oath in the name of God, saying, 'You shall not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons or for yourselves.' Did not King Solomon of Israel," there it is, "did not King Solomon of Israel sin on account of such women? Among the many nations there was no king like him, and he was beloved by his God, and God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, foreign women made even him to sin. Shall we then listen to you and do all this great evil and act treacherously against our God by marrying foreign women?' And one of the sons of Jehoiada, son of the high priest Elishib, was the son-in-law of Sanballat the Horonite. I chased him away from me. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood, the covenant of the priests and the Levites. Then I cleansed them from everything foreign, and I established the duties of the priests and Levites, each in his work. And I provided for the wood offering at appointed times and for the first fruits. Remember me, O my God, for good." Okay, now that's the book right before Esther. This concern about not marrying foreign wives who might lead a person into idolatry. And yet in this very next book now, deliverance is going to come for God's people because of this kind of intermarriage, this Jewish girl marrying this Gentile king. And so again, I would say that, as we're trying to kind of make sense of this, Esther, going through this year-long process of purification, one of the things, again, to notice is that there's sort of a setup going on here where you see these people living under the heavy burden of the law, the law of cosmetics and purification before a wedding. But at the same time, God about to do something to bring redemption for his people apart from the law. A Jewish girl marrying a Gentile king. That is not according to Jewish law. That is a departure from Jewish law and custom. And yet, nonetheless, God is going to do this new thing, by his grace. And his redemption will not be according to the law, but according to his grace apart from the law. And so, that, again, there's several things I think we can take from this, and I'd say that's probably the most important to understand, that when God saves his people, it is finally not through the law, but through grace, through what he does for us in Christ. But it will always, I think, continue to perplex us, perplex people. My goodness, it just seems so excessive. These girls have this long treatment. But then also notice this too. In verse 13, when the girl, okay, now I'm back in Esther, back in the second chapter of Esther. In verse 13, when each girl would go into the king, she was given whatever she asked for to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. And the key part of that then is that when Esther goes in, and we'll come to that in a moment, what were these things that they would take? Now there have been various theories about that, whether it was a special kind of cosmetic, a special outfit, just simply an item for her own comfort. I mean, sort of the modern equivalent or the ancient equivalent of like a teddy bear. What was it that these girls were taking? Some have even suggested, some commentators have suggested that these were even sexual toys, for this night with the king. That is left to our imagination. But in some ways, that's all beside the point. Because the reason why it mentions this is because when Esther goes in, she doesn't do what the rest of the girls do. Okay, that's going to come up now. And so in verse 14, it says again, in the evening, each girl would go in. In the morning, she'd come back to the harem in the custody of this eunuch. And then that girl would not go in again unless the king delighted in her and she was summoned by name. Now, all of that is important, again, and so much of what happens in these early chapters of Esther is set up for what's coming later. Because the important thing here is that these girls are not allowed back in to see the king unless the king decides so. And that's going to become important for what later happens in this plot with Esther, is because by God's grace, she will be given access to the king when so many of these other girls are not. Is that this is part of God's favor for Esther, is that God raises Esther in the esteem of the king and everybody else in his court. So that whereas all these other girls in the king's harem are denied access, or they might have occasional access only if the king desires them, Esther, by God's grace, will be given special access to the king. But we're going to have to wait on that and to see how that plays out. But again, all of this sounds strange to us, but it's important for the story that follows. And so now verse 15, when the turn came for Esther, daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai. Now remember, Mordecai and Esther are cousins, even though Mordecai, once Esther becomes an orphan, Mordecai raises her. So when it's her turn to go into the king, the uncle of Mordecai, blah, 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 who had adopted her as his own daughter, to go in. When it's her turn to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. Okay, so this is what stands out about Esther. All these other girls, they take something with them. And again, it is somewhat left to our imagination what that means. But what separates Esther now is that she defers to this eunuch and says, okay, well, you tell me what I should take in. And so you see now with Esther is that there's this willingness, to listen to others, not to assert herself, but at the same time, in the process, she always manages to get ahead. And that Esther's way of getting ahead is not like Vashti. If Queen Vashti said, gets invited or even commanded by the king to come into his party so that she can be shown off, and she refuses. And Esther is the opposite of that. Always by deferring to others, listening to others, and believe this is very much pointing us as Christians to the way of Jesus. Jesus, who did not assert himself. Jesus did not count equality with God as a thing to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, born in our human likeness. This is how Paul talks about it to the Philippians. This is very much Esther, pointing ahead to the way of Christ and to the way of us as Christians. To not always insist on our own way, but to ask others, well, what do you think? How should I handle this? That's Esther. Again, very different from Vashti. Esther, who submits here to the guidance of others, but submitting and also trusting in God to pull her through all of this. That trusting that God will truly keep his promise to lift up the lowly, to exalt the humble. And so this is Esther now. Is that while these other girls in the harem are taking whatever they want with them for their one-night encounter with the king, Esther, she's going to trust and rely on others. Well, what do you think I should take? And then at the end of verse 15, now Esther was admired by all who saw her. Okay, there is this exaltation. There is God lifting up the lowly. And so then in verse 16, when Esther was taken to King Ahasuerus in his royal palace in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth in the 7th year of his reign. And I'll just pause there. We actually saw that last week. We looked ahead to that part of the verse because, all of this story began. Esther, the very first chapter of Esther, began when this king was in the 3rd year of his reign. Now we're in the 7th year of his reign. And just kind of keeping track of the chronology of this story is kind of interesting. That this opening scene between the king and Vashti happened after 3 years of his reign, and now it seems that 4 years have passed, between that episode, and when Esther finally goes in to see the king. It's possible just sort of historically, the Bible story itself does not tell us this, but it's possible historically this just simply does mean that this is the period when the king was caught up in his military battles with Greece. So perhaps he was simply distracted by these other military campaigns, and that could explain this passage of time. But whatever the reason now, some years have passed, and I guess if nothing else, I think the story would just simply have us recognize, again, that the king does nothing if it's not done in excess. That he stewed for some time over Queen Vashti, who said no to him. Then there was this big plan to go and seek all these virgins from all over the kingdom. And then they all had their time of cosmetics and purification. That time passed. And then Esther had to wait in line behind these other women in the harem. It's just that is part of the story, is that everything is done, excessively. Everything is done, nothing is done in moderation in this kingdom. But so finally we get to 7 years now into the reign of this king, and Esther finally goes in for her turn with the king. And in verse 17 now, once again, that exaltation, that theme of God raising up the lowly continues. Because in verse 17 we read, the king loved Esther more than all the other women. Of all the virgins, she won his favor and devotion, so that he set the royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And I would say this is also unique now in this story, is that up till now, this king has not been a sympathetic character. Mostly we just see this guy kind of bombastically displaying his wealth in front of people, having these long parties, banquets, and then he's sort of He's just sort of a captive of his own emotions. He flies off the handle at Queen Vashti, and then he has this big plan. He has to go to his advisors and say, what should I do? And they have this big plan to gather all these virgins into the harem. Everything just seems a little bit kind of over the top with this guy. Again, he's either maybe the captive of his own emotions, captive of his own maybe greed and wealth, always showing off what he has, captive of his own regulations that he has to follow. But now we actually do, I would say, get this very human side, finally, of this king. That we see a man who loves Esther, and she wins his favor and devotion. In the King James, the king loved her and she obtained grace and favor in his sight, more than all the other virgins. So there is something sort of humanizing about this moment. I would say this isn't just a king for us to kind of poke fun at, but we get a king now finally with some real human emotions, I think, that are actually, really quite honorable now with this king. And he sets the royal crown on her head. He makes her queen instead of Vashti. And then, once again, we go back to the bombast, to the excess. Then the king gave a great banquet to all his officials and ministers. Now we get the royal wedding banquet. But he calls this Esther's banquet, or in the King James, Esther's feast. So there's a bit of heart here in this. This is a king in love with his queen and celebrating a marriage. He also granted a holiday to the provinces, or a release, you might say, gave gifts with royal liberality. So now this is, sort of the king sort of saying, okay, you can take a year off of paying your taxes. Okay, this guy's got enough money, so he's so happy with his new bride that he throws one more party and even gives a special gift to his citizens, a break from paying taxes. That's what kind of holiday this is, or a release, and is even now giving gifts once again. So there is always that element of excess and kind of wildness about this king, just giving away things. But again, I would say we really do have a king now with maybe a more human side of him that we're finally seeing. But I'd like to just simply get to the end of this book because this next part of the plot, I think we can just kind of handle it briefly. That's going to be important for what happens next, but it's not really labored on in great detail. So in verse 19 now, when the virgins were being gathered together, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Okay, so remember, after all these women have their time with the king, they're all put into this harem. And even Esther, it seemed, now is going to be in this harem, even though she is the queen, that is. She's the one with the crown on her head. So now they're all gathered together. They're in this harem. Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. So we've noticed this about Mordecai, is that he is a Jew living in the Persian kingdom. He himself comes from royal background in Jerusalem. He's a descendant of King Saul. Not necessarily direct descendant, but he comes from that family. But even now in Persia, it seems he's got some kind of position. Maybe he's a gardener, a gatekeeper, something. He seems to hang out at the palace. That's going to come up in the story. So he's sitting there. And in verse 20, now Esther had not revealed her kindred or her people as Mordecai had charged her. For Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. Okay, so there it is once again, Esther. She listens to people, she defers, she is obedient. But this does not mean, again, I think in our own world, we tend to think that if someone's obedient, they're going to get stepped on. But this is God's people living by faith. And we do listen, submit, obey to one another. We do all these things for one another. We serve one another, and we may get stepped on, but we also trust that there is a God who watches over us, who lifts up the lowly, and that is certainly Esther's story. So she's listening to Mordecai, even now she's queen. She's still listening to the cousin who raised her. And what's interesting is she's not going to reveal her kindred or her people. She's not going to let people know that she's a Jew. No, that's very interesting. We've made some comparisons between Esther and Daniel. somebody else who lived in exile and had a similar story of exaltation. Someone else who found himself in favor with his king living in exile, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, those three guys who ended up in the furnace. But here's an interesting contrast, is that the story of Daniel and then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that's a story of guys who right off the bat were very open about their Jewish faith, that they worship the God of Israel, the Lord, and nobody would convince them otherwise. When the king made a law that you could not pray to the Lord, they continued to do so, and they faced the consequences for that. Now, what's interesting is that Esther is not quite like that. She is not going to let everybody know that she is a Jew, that she worships the Lord. Mordecai tells her not to keep that quiet for now. My mind sort of plays these hypothetical games. Well, how far would Esther and Mordecai take that? If somebody asked them to worship another god, would they? I don't know. I don't think so. If somebody asked them, remember, that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were asked to bow down to that big statue made by the Babylonian king, and they refused. They weren't going to, Nebuchadnezzar said, you've got to worship this statue, and they said, nope, we'll only worship the Lord. And this is a little different now with Esther. It's not like anybody's asking Mordecai and Esther to bow down to a statue or an idol. But again, there's a different kind of piety here about Esther and Mordecai. They're not announcing it to the world. And I think Mordecai, again, we've said in this Bible study that it's not, this is not a period of widespread Jewish persecution. Okay, that's going to come into the story, that there will be a persecution against the Jews, but they're actually living in a time when Jews are finding favor from the Persian king. It's the Persian king who is sending all these Jews back to Jerusalem and giving them money even to rebuild the temple. So it's, Jews actually are finding some favor under Persian laws. But there maybe is a sense that maybe Mordecai is perceptive here. He says it's not entirely safe for us Jews to put our necks out there, that there maybe is a sense that there's a fear of some anti-Semitism, some persecution against the Jews. And so he says to Esther, just be careful now. Don't go advertising your Jewish faith. And so Esther listens to him about this, at least for now. She's going to keep this secret for now. And so in verse 21 then, in those days, and now here we get this interesting plot wrinkle. In those days, while Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Ahasuerus. Now, we don't really know much about these guys, although if you look back to the beginning of Esther, back in the first chapter, we get the names of some of these eunuchs. So this is not the first time these guys are mentioned. That's actually back in Esther Chapter 1, verse 10. Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zethar, and Sarkis, these 7 eunuchs. These two of these guys, Bigthan and Teresh, I do see Bigtha in there. I don't see Teresh. I don't know if that's just another one who wasn't mentioned back in the first chapter, or if he goes by a different name or whatever. But anyways, this king has all these eunuchs, and a couple of them now, I guess they see a weakness in Ahasuerus. They see a chance maybe to take the throne for themselves. Whatever it is, they've got something against the king, and they're going to get rid of him. They conspire to assassinate the king. But, verse 22, the matter came to the knowledge of Mordecai. Okay, so somehow he's hanging out at the gate, and he's able to eavesdrop. He hears some of the whispering, the conspiracy, the conversation. He realizes that these guys have it in for the king, and he told it to Queen Esther, and Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, both the men were hanged on the gallows. It was recorded in the book of the annals in the presence of the king. All right, now we'll just pause there. That's as far as we're going to go this week. But Mordecai now has been the instrument of the king's deliverance. By the end of this book, we know that Esther will be the instrument of the deliverance of all of her people. But at least for now, Mordecai and then Esther, she comes to the rescue also. She's the one who passes this message along to the king. But already now, these people who have come in the favor of the king by God's grace, because they are God's people, they are going to be the instruments of deliverance for others. Is that when God lifts us up, when God raises us up, when we humble ourselves and serve others, again, we may get stepped on, but God lifts up the lowly. We trust and we do all of this. We submit to others, obey others, help others, serve others, knowing that God will lift us up. And, again, what this is telling us is that in the process, we will also be God's instruments to help others, to rescue others. And so already that's going on. And then we'll just have to hold on to this detail for now. Because this little matter where Mordecai helps the king is going to come back later in the plot. Right now, the matter just drops. The king records this. They forget about it, but that's going to come up later on in this story now, when the king finally recognizes Mordecai for what he's done for him, even though for now they forget about it. So, studying Esther is interesting because, all these details, you just kind of have to hold on to all these threads because this little thread comes up now, but it's going to get picked up later on in the story. But it gives us enough to hold on to for now. Esther, again, she is, again, submitting to others, listening to others, obeying others, but again, trusting that God will raise her up. And it's so interesting in Esther because, again, God is not mentioned by name anywhere in this book. And yet, nonetheless, this is exactly the sort of thing that we have come to learn about who God is and how God watches over his people. Even though they submit to people, listen to others, serve others, again, get stepped on in the process, they trust that God will be faithful, that God will do what he has promised and lift up the lowly. And so that's exactly what's going on now for Esther and Mordecai in this story. So we'll pause there. Very interesting book, huh? Just an interesting window into life in the royal court, where you get 6 months of oil and 6 months of perfume and cosmetics. Just an interesting place to live. But again, also a window into what it means to live as God's people in adversity and difficult situations. All right, let's pause there. We've gone through the second chapter. And what do you think? Comments, questions, reflections? How do you like it? What do you think?
What happens to all the virgins that aren't collected?
Yeah.
They live their whole lives until they're 80 years old in the harem of the king.
Yep. Yeah. That's, in verse 14, that describes that, after that one night with the king, each girl would go back to the second harem. So there's the one harem for the girls getting their cosmetic treatments and waiting for their turn with the king. And there's the second harem of women who have been with the king. And you might not ever see the king again your whole life unless the king...
What a waste of a human life.
I know. It's not what I would want for my daughters.
No.
And you would be cared for. You wouldn't have to worry about, being hungry or, having a roof over your head. But it doesn't sound like a good life to me. And it's very similar to what we talked about the eunuchs. Last week we had some conversation about the life of a eunuch. Is that, some parents might have thought this was a great opportunity. You had a good job. Again, you weren't starving. You weren't homeless. You had a close connection to the king. And so I'm guessing some families did see this as a great opportunity for their boys, but I think most of us would say it's not what I want for my boys. In the same way, I would say the life of a girl in the harem is not what I would want for my girls. But I guess the upshot, the silver lining is you had a roof over your head. It's Not great. You know, it's interesting too, I think in the New Testament, you know, in the New Testament, Paul, when he's describing the life of a pastor or a bishop, he says, you know, let a pastor or a bishop be the husband of one wife, you know. I mean, you know, in the Old Testament, we have plenty of examples of faithful believers who, you know, had multiple wives and concubines. But boy, it so often just led to trouble, you know. And you know, you could think about Abraham, you know, when Abraham and Sarah get impatient waiting for a child, you know, they come up with this brilliant idea, you know, of having Abraham sleep with the maid. Wasn't that a good idea? And how did that work out? It didn't, you know. It just caused trouble for them in the home. And finally God said, what are you doing? Stop. I told you I would give you a child, and I'm going to give you a child. You know, or, you know, when you look at Jacob, you know, he marries Leah and Rachel, plus they've got their concubines. And I mean, you know, by God's grace, that this family, you know, these were their children became the fathers of the tribes of Israel. So that's a wonderful thing. But then you really see, you kind of look deeper and you see, boy, there was a lot of trouble in those families. These sisters fighting against each other, jealous of each other. So yeah, I mean, generally speaking, the Bible does not lift up polygamy or harems or concubines as a really, you know, this is not a positive development in family relations. You know, when God created marriage, it was Adam and Eve. And you know, whenever you kind of get away from that model of marriage, it usually just spells trouble. Again, Solomon, I mean, that's what we read there in Nehemiah, is that, you know, Solomon is kind of this great biblical example of, yeah, I mean, a king can have a whole harem, but it's not gonna turn out well. So, on the one hand, silver lining, these girls had food to eat and a roof over their heads, but not what I want. Yeah, not what God's people should strive for.
Over all these years that she was preparing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, she kept it quiet that she was a Jew.
Yeah, right.
No one found out.
Yeah, right.
Well, that was God working, but for being there so long.
Yeah, that's right.
Amazing they didn't know she was
there. Yeah, that's right. It is amazing. Yeah. Yeah, and it's so interesting, and I think, you know, I say it's even unsettling, you know, that Esther and Mordecai, you know, again, that they say you have to keep this a secret. I mean, as Christians, you know, Jesus says, you know, let your light so shine before others, you know, that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. I mean, generally, as Christians, we want to live in a way that other people know that we are believers, in a way that we are sharing the hope that we have. But at the same time, Esther, yeah, she is keeping this under wraps. But, you know, then again, as we go on in the story, we also see that the great moment of deliverance in this story is when she finally does reveal, you know, who she is, you know, and reveals her faith. But yeah, it's really remarkable that she was keeping this under wraps in all this time of preparation, like you say, you know, until the right moment. So yeah, very interesting.
My Bible asks for 3 questions on that. And what it asks is, when do you let me see if I can see. When do you conceal your Christian faith?
Mm-hmm.
When do you reveal it?
Mm-hmm.
And what would you do if your faith led you into danger?
Yeah.
And I had a hard
Yeah.
answering those questions.
And I think that's right. And I would say this book is forcing us to ask difficult questions. And I think especially given the fact, again, that this was written about the same period of time as Ezra and Nehemiah. You know, again, Ezra and Nehemiah are dealing with the same time period. You know, Jews who are going back to Jerusalem, and then they have to separate from their wives because these foreign wives might lead them into idolatry. And then Esther marries a foreign husband. It's forcing us to ask difficult questions like this. Are there moments when you would conceal your faith for the sake of others? Because in the end, the fact that Esther concealed her faith for a time put her in this situation where she was able to come to the rescue of her people. Now, does God want us to be that calculating? Am I supposed to hide my faith if I think it might be helpful to somebody else? Or do I simply always wear my faith on my sleeve? I don't know if there's an easy answer to that. But I would say, again, at the very least, we can see in the book of Esther that the greatest, and just saying this, that the greatest moment of deliverance in Esther comes because she reveals who she is. So, we haven't come to that point of Esther yet, but it is coming. So I would say, goodness, is there a moment perhaps in your life when you say, I have to be quiet about this for now, maybe? But then Esther would say, but trust me, the greatest deliverance will come when you actually are honest about who you are. Is that in the end, God does not want these things to be hidden forever. In the end, God does want who you believe in. He wants that to be evident to others. But I wouldn't say that that's an easy answer. And Esther does not let us kind of take easy answers. Yeah, the Bible kind of pins you down like this sometimes. You kind of end up like Jacob wrestling with God, It
made me think of the time that my grandson and I were talking, and he looked at me and said, well, Grandma, I don't believe the way you do. And it really took me back when he said that, because I didn't realize, because he was raised in the church. He was Baptist. He was confirmed. He was active in the church.
Yeah, right.
And then, so now, you ride that little roller coaster in there whenever you're discussing things.
Yeah.
See if I can even say it, but when you're discussing things now, it's not a touchy subject, but yet it's
right.
easy to talk about.
Yeah, sure, right. Yeah, and I think
I never gave it a thought.
Yeah, and I would say that's that is great, Pat, because that is the kind of situation that we do all deal with. None of us might end up being in the royal harem someday of some king, having to conceal our Christian faith. We might not end up exactly in Esther's situation, but I think as parents or grandparents, there are times when we bite our tongues. When we say, okay, I'm not gonna force this on you. I'm just gonna be maybe a little bit quiet and patient right now. So I don't, offend you or kind of unnecessarily offend you and sort of push you away from faith. So, those are those moments when I think all of us kind of, we're quiet, the way Esther and Mordecai perhaps are quiet. But again, in the end, the only way that there really, again, can be deliverance is if at some point we do, point people to Jesus and say, this is our real hope. This is the one who will deliver us. So yeah, again, but I'm not saying that's an easy answer. Esther won't let us do that. Yeah. Well, if that's enough for now, we could sing. There's a song I'd love to sing, and it's in the Green Book. So pull out the Green Book, number 359. An interesting, lovely tune. 359, in Christ there is no east or west. You can see that if you look at the very bottom in the small print, the tune is a Negro spiritual. So this melody is part of our nation's history, coming out of people who struggled and suffered under slavery, but who came to know Christ, Jesus, as one who sets us free, Jesus who does not enslave us, but gives us true freedom. And I think this is appropriate, thinking about Esther now, as one who, marries this Gentile king and points out that in the end, even though, there were these Jewish laws about, God gave his people these laws, these commandments about, not marrying people from other nations. In the end, God's plan was to send the good news into the nations so that in Christ there is no east or west. And so, this past Sunday, we get on Sunday, just a few days ago, we had Naaman, the Syrian king, receive healing, the Gentile. And we had the Samaritan leper who was healed by Jesus. Because in Christ, finally, there is no east or west. So that you and I also, who are not Jewish, who are not the physical descendants of Abraham, nonetheless are counted among Abraham's children by faith. So good news here in this song. In Christ, there is no east or west. I'll play it on the recorder just to help kind of, get this melody into our ears. So here's the melody. Okay, in Christ there is no east or west. In Christ there is no east or west, in him no south or north, but one great fellowship of love throughout the whole wide earth. In him shall true hearts everywhere their high communion find. His service is the golden cord, close binding all mankind. Join hands then, brothers of the faith, whate'er your race may be. Who serves my Father as a son is surely kin to me. In Christ now meet both east and west, in him meet south and north. All Christly souls are one in him throughout the whole wide earth. Yeah, maybe not a song we've sung a whole lot, maybe one we should sing more often, but a wonderful message to it. So let's together pray. Whether we're from the east, west, north, or south, let's all pray to our one heavenly Father. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Okay, great to see you all here today. Good to hear about how your lives are going, and hopefully we'll run into each other, see each other in the next few days, walking in and out and getting our pictures taken. But we'll be back next week. So till then, take care. God's peace be with you.
Bye.
Bye.